Can you all hear me?
Yes.
All right. Thank you very much for the invitation. I appreciate the opportunity. And in the interest of supporting the notion of creative theoretical struggle, just a couple of introductory remarks. One of the interests for me in coming to a place like this is that the Marxism and the interest and awareness of Marxian theory can be taken for granted. Most of the places I speak, I can't do that. So my presentations have to include, subtly or not so subtly, trying to make the audience stay with me as I go through a Marxist argument, even if I don't use Marxist language. Having said that, Marx is a wonderful resource, rich, powerful, just terribly unknown in our culture for all the reasons you know. But one of the things about Marxian theory I've always found remarkable is its openness to a variety of interpretations, which is frustrating because perhaps it'd be nice if it were all straightforward and clear, but it isn't. Just to illustrate that, my brain goes into a strange place when I hear about inevitability in the same sentence as Marxism, since for me inevitability belongs with religion, and Marx didn't like it. That is the religion. So I don't find inevitability of anything in Marx. But that's a matter of one's interpretation. Likewise, when wages fall, if indeed they do over a period of time, that's an interesting phenomenon. Certainly was interesting to Marx because he talked about all kinds of periods when wages fell or rose for that matter, because it was significant. The most significant thing about the fall in wages that workers actually get paid at the end of the week since the last 30 years is because it's the first time it happened in 150 years of American history over an extended period of time. We live in a society that is unique in the world because for 150 years it had rising real wages for its working class. No other capitalist country did that. And when a country becomes used to a rising standard of wages, real wages, all kinds of interesting things happen. We, for example, are a society composed of immigrants. Hello, that's because they came here to acquire rising real wages, making the presumption they couldn't get it where they were, and they would get it if they came here, and they were right. Which is why it continued, which is a lot about our society, really important. If you have a society that has rising real wages for 150 years, you can begin to think that there's something exceptional about your country, because there is. You can think it's magical. You can even begin to think that every generation will live better than the one before. And you can be sustained in that position. If a period of rising real wages that are paid to workers at the end of the week goes on for 150 years, even across the Great Depression, it did. Can you imagine the trauma of a society when that stops? In the 1970s, it stopped and it never resumed. The real wage of an American worker at the end of the week who gets paid is about the same today as it was in 1978. The only thing more remarkable than that phenomenon in our culture is the fact that there's been no national discussion or debate about it. I won't embarrass you by asking how many of you didn't realize until I just told you. So real wages have an impact on a society. Families fell apart as a result. Most of the women went to work full-time, as they hadn't done before, in the industrial sector, partly to cope with the end of rising real wages, transformed the family. Leftists didn't understand it, but the right wing did, and made family values and their reconstitution the central program, which was a real response to what was happening. So it's really important that it had happened and that it stopped. It's mechanical to imagine that this is about Marx's realization problem. It's only a realization problem, as Brendan said correctly, if the money you don't pay workers in wages doesn't get spent some other way. And we know how it got spent in the United States. The wonders of American capitalism is, as for 30 years their wages didn't go up, but their productivity did. Remember the difference, right? Productivity is what a worker produces. per hour of his or her work. And in a capitalist system, that's what the worker gives the employer, productivity. Real wage is what the employer gives the worker. So if for 30 years the real wage is flat and the productivity keeps rising, you have an explosion of surplus and profit. And the genius of American capitalism was, having stopped giving workers rising wages, the capitalists who made a lot of money out of that phenomenon turned around and lent it back to them so they could continue their consumption, keep the economy going, with the difference being from now on your rising productivity is not paid with rising wages. Instead, we, the capitalists, benefit from your rising productivity and flat wages, lend you the money you didn't get in wages, so you have to pay it back to us with interest. Usually at this point in my presentation, I stop speaking and I play the national anthem. What I like about Marx and the theory of crisis, which is what I want to concentrate on, starts with volume 2, right in the beginning of volume 2 of Capital, is a wonderful little equation. Marx liked equations, not in the obsessive way that economics as a profession does it, but as an illustration. And this equation he writes down really interesting. It starts with money, what a capitalist sort of begins with, and it says, you know, the capitalist has to go through all these steps. First thing the capitalist has to do is he has to convert his money into workers and tools and equipment and raw materials. And right there are all kinds of problems. Workers might not be available in sufficient quality or quantity. Raw materials might not be there. Tools may not. There's already a lot of problems. But let's assume, maybe, he can overcome those. Then he's got to put them together. He's got to get the workers to work with the tools and the raw materials. There's a whole lot of problems there. Workers have resistance, they don't like being workers, they don't like the boss, they'd rather be swimming, whatever. And he's got all kinds of problems, supervising, controlling. You know that from your job. The supervisor's always on you. You have to worry, you have to put a camera in the bathroom to watch what you're doing. And then he finally, let's suppose he can get through all those problems, he has an output, a commodity, a thing. Well, you know, he has to convert that into money. He has to take that output and sell it. Well, whole other problem. They don't have the right quantity of volumes. They don't have the right quality. And he makes it. And no sooner has he finally gotten through all those steps, if he's lucky, he can sell that output for more money than it cost him to buy the equipment, buy the raw materials, and hire the workers. So he actually has a surplus. Thinking he might be done, it turns out, this is volume 3 now, that he has to distribute that surplus to all kinds of people to keep the system going. He has to give a portion to the government for taxes so that if the workers revolt, he can kill them. It's expensive. And he has to give another portion to bankers because he may need credit. He has to give them an interest rate. He has to give merchants a cut so that they'll sell the stuff. No sooner has he gone through all the steps that can go wrong to make a surplus, then he has to distribute the surplus, which volume 3 takes us to. The point of this is to drive home to us that there's 800 million things that can go wrong in the capitalist system. It's not an engine of self-reproduction. It's a fragile, delicate enterprise that can and often does veer right off the tracks. And it's not this or that that makes it happen. It's an endless array of things that can and do go wrong. And if 2 or 3 of them do, it overwhelms those that don't. What we have is cycles. When I became an economist as a young person, it was the 1960s. And we radicals set up a leftist economics association to be different from the American Economic Association, which was a very conservative enterprise at that time.